Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Billy Perigo. I'm a journalist at Time Magazine covering technology. Today's panel is titled Facebook Content Moderation in Africa, Human Rights, Democracy, and Dignity at Risk. The event is sponsored by the Real Facebook Oversight Board, Foxglove, and the Signals Network. Now, many of you may have seen that earlier today, a former Facebook content moderator filed a lawsuit in the Nairobi court accusing Meta and its largest outsourcing company in Africa, Sama, of human trafficking, union busting, and many more violations of the Kenyan Constitution. At this event, we'll hear live for the first time from that former content moderator, Daniel Motaung, who joins us from South Africa. Also joining us as an unannounced special guest today is Daniel's lawyer, Mercy Mutemi, from the Kenyan law firm Nzili and Sumbi Advocates. She was at court in Nairobi this morning and can give us the latest details on the case. Making up the rest of the panel, we have Delphina Halgan Mishra, director of the Signals Network, which is a whistleblower support NGO that is providing psychosocial support to Daniel. We have Phumzile Van Dam, a former South African MP, a disinformation expert, and a member of the Real Facebook Oversight Board. And last but not least, we have Corey Kreider, the director of Foxglove, which is a legal NGO that for years has been advocating for better protections for content moderators around the globe. So for those of you who don't know Daniel's story, first I'll offer a brief kind of primer about my reporting on what has happened at Sama and his story before handing the floor over to him to tell it in his own words. And just a brief warning beforehand, this conversation will probably include some references to traumatizing topics. In order to avoid digging up Daniel's trauma, I'm going to avoid specifics as much as possible, and I request that any journalists in the Q&A do so as well. But unfortunately, it is hard to do that entirely, given the heavy territory of this conversation. So, this February, Time published an investigative story that I had spent months working on. Its title was Inside Facebook's African Sweatshop. The story detailed how there was low pay, widespread trauma, and alleged union busting at Facebook's largest content moderation facility in Africa, operated by Sama, which describes itself as an ethical AI company. The story was based on dozens of conversations with current and former Facebook content moderators at Sama, including Daniel. Now, for those of you who don't know, content moderators are basically the emergency first responders of social media. The world is a pretty dark place, and without these moderators, unfortunately, your social media feeds would be full of photos and videos of murders, torture, suicides, rapes, child abuse, I mean, you name it. So that's the job. And at Sama, this was the work that Daniel and many of his colleagues were doing. But Daniel was fired by Sama, as my story detailed, after he led a group of more than 100 colleagues in an effort to win better pay and working conditions by unionizing. In his termination letter, Sama said that he had bullied and coerced his colleagues to join that effort and had put Sama's relationship with Facebook at great risk. Sama, for its part, denies that he was improperly fired and says that it pays all of its employees fair wages. And Meta says that it requires its outsourcing partners to meet the highest standards of pay and benefits and support. So at this point, I'm going to bring Daniel into the conversation. Daniel, welcome. It's so great to see you. And congratulations, firstly, on what I know has been quite intense few weeks and months for you. I wonder if you could start by kind of telling us the story of what job advert you responded to, what you expected the job that you were going to be, and what you found there instead.
Thank you, Billy. So in 2019, actually in 2018, I was looking for a job online, and I came across an advert from Summersource, which is now called Summer, of course. And the job, or rather the ad was about content moderation, which I applied for. But the ad did not really say anything about the fact that the job contained or entailed me having to deal with graphic, for example, graphic content almost on a daily basis. And that this graphic content has the potential to actually cause me lifelong harm, such as PTSD and other mental health related issues. It never said anything of that sort. Instead, what it said was that I would be doing basically basic administrative tasks, and I would. It did include the word analysis, and to my understanding, I did understand that, look, if you are moderating content, and this is based purely on my understanding of the words content and moderation, you would have to at least apply some sort of analytical skills. That was it. It ended there. It didn't say anything about the fact that if I accept the job, if I apply for the job, then potentially I may end up being a subject or a person who's going to end up suffer from PTSD, and that accepting the job basically means that I have accepted that there's a chance that I will suffer from PTSD or other mental health related issues.
So thanks for that, Daniel. The suit alleges that this wasn't a one-off occurrence and that it happened systematically across SAMA, but in your own personal experience, to the extent that you're willing to kind of go into detail about it, could you talk about the effect and the impact that this job had on your own mental health?
You know, this is something that is really difficult for me. I don't like talking about. I don't want to talk about this. Most of the time, what I can say, what I'm prepared to say for now, is that my life is like a horror movie. You know, like I think in terms, because it is. I would like to actually get someone who's sitting and watching this to sort of like get into my shoes and understand what I'm talking about when I'm saying I used to watch content that ended up causing me graphic violence. So, for instance, if we were to play, let's say, a very graphic video of a live video, for instance, of someone being beheaded, which is the first thing I saw. I saw a live video of someone being beheaded, and if we were to play that, and given the fact that the video wouldn't even be live, I think an average person, would actually be impacted in some way because of that video, and so you take it a step further, whereby you end up watching a live video of someone being beheaded, and then you end up seeing other videos and images and content on a daily basis that ends up taking you to a place that you never imagined that as a person you'll end up there. I never imagined that that one day when I'm sitting like this, as I'm sitting and talking to you right now, that I would find myself thinking about death, because the fact of the matter is that now I have a heightened fear of death because of the content that I moderated on a daily basis. And because of that, my quality of life has changed drastically. I believe that even if I have to say so myself, you can say whatever you like about my ego. I believe that I was extremely sharp. After university, I was sharp. But now I'm not that person anymore. My behavior has changed. My quality of life has changed. I don't look forward to going outside. I don't look forward to going in public spaces. I don't look forward to going into a professional space again, because my view of the world and one of what I think you need to understand in respect of this is that I'm a political science student, and once you reinforce this understanding and or feeling that capitalism, for instance, is going to exploit you and chew you and spit you out. So that is something that was reinforced. So I have become the person that I am today, a person that I did not wish to be, a person that I do not even imagine that I'd become after varsity, because I had potential. When I went to Kenya, because I wanted to change my life. I wanted to change the life of my family. And I believe that was the starting point for me. Instead, I came out a different person, a person who has been destroyed. Sama is like, in fact, what happened to me and the rest of my colleagues. And in fact, even now, I can even go as far as to say that current content moderators who are still working at Sama right now, they are working in a company. In fact, they are not even working. They are simply products, because it's sort of like Sama manufactures and produces traumatized people. So what I'm saying here is that if Sama goes to the public and says, okay, I have uplifted over 50, the lives of over 52,000 people, it pretty much sounds to me like Sama is simply basically exploiting people and then spitting them out. In actual fact, Sama does that, because the employees at Sama, all of them, and I'm not only talking about content moderators here, and I'm talking about my experience at Sama as an employee under Sama, as an employee for Facebook under Sama. That is what I mean. Is that you are employed on a contractual basis. There's no security of tenure. So basically and in fact, they used to tell us every single time that, look, you are expended. We are doing you a favor. We came from a poor background. You need this job. So take whatever that we give you and basically shut up. Don't say anything. All the Kenyans, I think yes, generally speaking, I want to argue that African content moderators are bearing the worst of this brand. If you were to compare them with the rest of the content moderators globally on a global level, we are bearing basically the worst. And the Kenyans, is very bad for them, because like some of them didn't even sign these temporary contracts that I'm talking about. And Sama continually, the managers of Sama continually tells them, look, we're doing you a favor. If you don't take what we throw at you, then you might as well leave the job, or we will fire you ourselves and find somebody else, because it's that much easy to replace a person.
So with these conditions that you've described, and I should say here that Sama denies most of the allegations that has been made in the lawsuit, and they say that they pay fairly and that they provide a suite of mental health protections to their employees. Obviously, you guys and your lawyers dispute that. So that brings me on to my next question, which is, what do you hope to change about these working practices that you've described, both at Sama and at Meta, Facebook, by bringing this lawsuit that you've brought to the courts today?
You see what has happened to me. What has happened to my colleagues? What has happened in 2019? Or rather, let me just keep it strictly to me. What has happened to me? Basically granted me an opportunity. It's an opportunity in a sense. Yes, I came out traumatized and whatever, and I'm suffering right now. But I believe I have a duty and or responsibility to change that, to ensure that the next person who comes along doesn't end up becoming another me. That the next person who comes along does not end up suffering from PTSD, doesn't end up becoming almost like an alcoholic, doesn't end up living in horror on a daily basis, doesn't even imagine about committing suicide, because it is known on record that some of the content moderators out there have actually attempted to commit suicide. And all of this is happening because Facebook, through outsourcing companies, and the bigger fish to fry here is actually Facebook. The outsourcing companies, they are smaller fish to fry. But what Facebook has done was to basically relegate its responsibility to these outsourcing companies and exploit people. And in fact, Sama does that, because Sama, its narrative in Africa is that we are saving poor Africans. We are going to take them out of their misery and then uplift them out of poverty, only to exploit them via misrepresentation, in a sense, because they post adverts out there lying to the people in respect of the actual job that they'll be doing, only for the applicant to find that, look, I've actually subjected, or I've actually accepted the destruction of my own mental health and life in general. So what I'm hoping to achieve is to change that, because I believe that content moderators can be dealt with in a better way. Facebook's content as well can be moderated in a better way. There are ways. The only thing that Facebook needs to do is to actually say, okay, if I don't have an idea, please help me. Speak out so that solutions are there. We can provide practical solutions about it. And because I've done the job, I sort of like have ideas in terms of how we can make this better. But the problem here is that you have corporate companies refusing to take this and instead opt to exploit people for profit. So I want to change that.
Thank you, Daniel. That was really, really eloquent. I want to move on now to Corey briefly. Welcome, Corey. You've done a lot of work at Foxglove about content moderation around the world. And I wondered if you could talk first about how Daniel's experience fits into what you know about how Facebook's overall global system with multiple different outsourcing companies operates.
That's right. Thanks, Billy. Foxglove, like you said, has been working with content moderators to help them speak up and organize around the world since 2019. And we're so pleased to be here with Daniel because we believe that the case he brought today through Mercy, his Kenyan lawyer, is going to make history. But to step back and put that in context, every single day, when millions of us sit there and scroll through our Facebook, we're not stopping and thinking, we're not realizing that sitting behind the screen are thousands of people just like Daniel. People don't realize that sitting behind their feed is, at the moment, a digital sweatshop. Facebook says there are at least 15,000 content moderators working around the world for Facebook. But as Daniel says, outsourced by Facebook, not taken responsibility for. So step back and just pause for a minute. When we around the world sit there and say, man, Facebook has got to do something about hate or misinformation or violence, and it does, by the way, we need to remember that at the moment, Mark Zuckerberg is dumping all the hard work and the danger and the pain of that effort onto people just like Daniel. So if all of us here want a safe social media, we've got to start by cleaning up Facebook's factory floor. That means ending the pretense that Facebook pushes that AI somehow does the work. It doesn't. People like Daniel do the work. And in fact, I think that there may be some content moderators watching the live stream today, and I want to shout out to those people at SAM in Nairobi and maybe elsewhere watching on the YouTube and say, you can help us win this case. That will help you. So please get in touch with Foxglove and with Mercy and join us.
Thanks, Corey. So one of the things that you and Mercy have said is that this case is unprecedented. You're trying to not just win damages, but also to kind of force a change to how these companies operate. Now, there is one case in the past of content moderators taking a class action lawsuit against Facebook. That was in 2020 in the US. There was a settlement of $52 million in damages for content moderators in several states, and that money was ostensibly to pay for mental health support. Another outcome of the case was that Facebook agreed to make several changes to the way that it dealt with harmful content, to the extent that it would harm the moderators who are looking at it. Can you talk about those changes, the extent to which they've been implemented, and how you're seeking to go beyond what that case achieved in terms of protections for moderators?
Absolutely. So in the Scola case, which is the American class action that you're describing, it settled for $52 million, which is enough to get a few content moderators, a couple of sessions of therapy. And Facebook agreed to make a couple of minor adjustments to the software that, by the way, it didn't roll out everywhere, including to places like Kenya or India, for example, at the same time. This case, I think, goes well beyond it. And Mercy will talk a bit more about it. You have a Kenyan lawyer, but it's forcing several specific reforms to Facebook's factory floor for the first time. Yes, we're seeking compensation, and yes, we're seeking harm and back pay for wages we say are unlawfully seized from these people, but it goes way farther than that. You've heard how Daniel, for example, led a fledgling union and that it was crushed. But what happened to him, if you think about it from, say, an American perspective, is exactly what Amazon tried and failed to do with Chris Smalls and the Amazon Union. And I have to say, from the Facebook perspective, this isn't over. Daniel and people are not going away. So this case is asking for Facebook and SAMA to be made to acknowledge that these people have a right to speak and acknowledge their right to organize and form a union. And in fact, we're seeking them to have to post a notice in their office and on Facebook's intranet, which is workplace, saying that they're not going to get in the way of people's rights to organize and form a union. Because ultimately, we think that the best people to say what needs fixing and to go and fix it are the people who do the work every day, the content moderators. So that's one of the things that we're seeking. I'll let Mercy talk a little bit more about some of the other parts of the Kenyan case. But right there, I think, seeking to establish for the first time that these people have a right to speak out and organize already goes beyond any other case that we've seen.
Thanks, Corey. So, yeah, Mercy, I'd love to move on to you now. I know you were up very late last night putting your finishing touches on the document, and then you had to be up this morning on the steps of the Kenyan courthouse. So I want to talk mostly about what the allegations in the case are. But before that, can you kind of give us a rundown of what happened this morning?
Luckily for us, first of all, thank you, Billy. But luckily for us, we were able to do a filing at 3 a.m. this morning, since our filing is virtually done nowadays. But this morning, we were able to have a meeting with the press and to actually talk to them about the case a little bit and just disclose what it is we were filing and why we felt it was an important case, not only for Daniel, but also for Kenyans and all the Africans who would have been in Daniel's place.
Mm-hmm. So could you kind of describe the main kind of legal violations that the case alleges happened at SAMA and Meta, and the protections that you seek to implement?
I have to warn you, the list of constitutional violations we found in this case is quite long, but maybe it would be easier if I tell you the situations that led to constitutional violations. And one of them is in how people are recruited to become content moderators. And it was through deceit, it was through material non-disclosure of critical facts, like that they were going to work for Facebook, essentially. And in that, we find that a lot of Africans were forced into forced labor situations and into human trafficking. When you leave your country to go to a job that you didn't apply for, that amounts to human trafficking. And then you come to the job and you're subjected to the most unfair working conditions. You don't get fair pay. The system that has been set up by Facebook, which is what they use, is a surveillance-based system that has impossible quotas that you have to meet. So when you look at those working conditions themselves, they go against our labor laws and against basic tenets like dignity. Even if you were desperate for a job, you'd still need to be treated in a dignified manner while you're at work. Then, considering the actual nature of the job, psychosocial support is not something that Facebook should give just as when it wishes to do. It's something that's very critical. It's very primary if you're going to become a content moderator to be given the appropriate psychosocial support. We don't see that in SAMA. And through that, they violated the right to health, which is very highly guaranteed in our constitution. That's why we're filing a constitutional petition. They've violated our supreme law. And then the fourth theme we are addressing is the union busting that happened. And in that, you see how SAMA stripped the employees at SAMA of their dignity, threatening to kick them back to poverty, to take them back where they came from, how they treated Daniel and eventually took away their voice. So there's a bunch of rights there that were affected: freedom of association, the right to strike, freedom of speech, being forced to say things that you don't really mean. They were forced to denounce the alliance, which is not right. And generally, when you look at it, these are people who fall between the bracket of 18 and 35, and that's the youth in our country. So they have special protections under the Constitution, and what we see some are doing is exploiting the youth. So those are some of the provisions we are going under. I have to insist that that's not the entire list. That's just a very super summarized list of the constitutional violations.
Yeah, I read the case and I counted 27 articles of the Constitution that you alleged to have been violated. And that's before you even get to the international law. However, in their most recent letter to you, Meta's lawyers have argued that, in fact, because Daniel was employed by Sama rather than Meta, that all of the allegations don't apply to Meta. Can you describe your response to that argument?
It's quite simple. Who owns Facebook? What content was being moderated? Was it Sama content or Facebook content? So who owns the platform? Number two, who controls the system that was used to do the work? See, the good thing with the jurisdiction we're filing this case in is that our courts are able to open that fake blind that Facebook is trying to put up and really look at who is the true employer, who has the control. Even when you talk about pay, it's not Sama that was essentially paying Daniel. Who was giving the money that was going to pay Daniel? Who was setting the standards? Who was saying, if the employees do not meet these quotas, then they have to go? For example, the system, just if you look at the system, the point on control of the system alone, it's strong enough to tell you that while Sama has its faults in that it created a very toxic environment for the workers, Facebook created the bigger demon because the system led to the compounding of the trauma that already comes intrinsically with content moderation. So there is no way to get out of this because agency, partnership, or whatever argument, all the roads lead to Facebook. They started the problem, they created the system, they have to take accountability for everything that's wrong with fixing the system.
Are you able to briefly kind of outline what we should expect to come next as the case kind of progresses? So
we are at the initial stages of the case. We just served Sama's lawyers. Facebook's lawyers had refused service earlier today, but later on accepted service. So we have to wait for a response because this is a system where every person will be given the right to present their case at the end of the day. So we'll go through the preliminaries, set down the case for hearing, and then Daniel will have a chance to tell his story in court. And we will be able to demonstrate to the court with evidence. That's what I need to insist about this case. We're not coming on based on allegations alone. Everything that Daniel has said is supported and corroborated. So we will have a chance to take the court through evidence after evidence showing that when we say that there was human trafficking in this case, there was human trafficking. When we say that they were negligent in providing for psychosocial support, wellness programs that were being provided by Sama do not amount to what a content moderator needs. So the hearing should be quite interesting where you follow through and listen to arguments on both sides. And I'm particularly interested in hearing the reasons for denying basic things like why not treat people with dignity? Why ask them questions like, do you come from a poor background, when in our constitution, that shouldn't be something that comes up in an interview. Whether you're poor or not poor, you should be treated with dignity, should be treated the same.
Thanks, Mercy. We need to move on now to Delphine, who is the director of the Signals Network, which is a whistleblower protection NGO. Delphine, it's great to see you again. For those who don't know, Delphine played a pretty instrumental role in helping get this story off the ground at a time when I'd spoken to lots of sources anonymously, and they had raised all of the issues that were going on at Sama, but we weren't sure what the legal risks would be of those people potentially breaking agreements that they'd signed with the company. Delphine, I wonder if you could kind of tell the audience here about the work that the Signals Network did for this story, but more broadly, the role that you see for NGOs like your own to assist with the investigative reporting process.
Yes, thank you, Billy, and thank you all for being here. So at the Signals Network, that's really the core of our work. Major media from the US or Europe, Time Magazine, New Yorker, Spiegel, Le Monde, they come to us when they're working with a source, with a whistleblower who need to find a lawyer, a therapist, a temporary safe house. And we provide this support to the sources who have shared important information with media, because for ethical reasons, journalists cannot provide that financial service, if I may say. And that's really the core of our work at the Signals Network, to support whistleblowers who have shared public interest information with the press. So that's how we work together, Billy, and your sources. So the sources you were talking to, as you said, wanted to find expert, trusted lawyers who could answer their questions they had. And thanks to our international network, we were able to find trusted expert lawyers who were able to answer the legal question of your sources. And then after, as the need came more visible, we were able to provide some therapy session, again with trauma experts, independent trauma experts who are now supporting and following Daniel, for example. And so we found this legal expert, therapist expert, and then paid for their services, as we believe that citizens would take some risk, could face retaliation because they bring public interest information to journalists, or because they are fighting against big companies. They deserve the support that other could have. And so that's why we exist. That's why, and I think we are an international organization really focused on media whistleblower, if I may say, but I think we are playing a critical role because media do not have other places to send the sources they work with. And I'm very happy that we were able to play a role to make this story happen, and many other stories. I also want to add one aspect, which is I described how we work to protect the whistleblower to make the story possible. But the story doesn't end the day of the publication of the article. So I'm very glad that as well we were able to bring Cory and Foxglove into the mix, because the idea is that once the story is published, the support for the whistleblower needs to continue, and it continues as long as needed. And the work to make the wrongdoing corrected, to make change happen, will not happen by magic. And you need amazing lawyers and advocates like Cory, Foxglove, Mercy to make it happen. It is not the work of the journalist, not the work of the whistleblower to make it happen on their own. And that's why I'm very glad that we brought Foxglove and the amazing team on board to fight the amazing fight they're doing right now. So it's an honor to have created such a network around your work, Billy, and your revelation. So that's what we're doing. And I think the work of the Signals and Foxglove speaks for itself of why it is needed if you want media and whistleblower to hold powerful interests accountable. You need such a network.
Thanks, Delphine. Yeah, I think it says a lot that the other big whistleblower story of the last 12 months was created by somebody who had a large financial reserve to fall back on. And obviously that kind of has an influence on the kinds of stories that get told. And obviously, when you don't have the financial resources to fall back on as a support network, that can have an influence on whether you choose to tell your story or not. But more generally, I mean, I know that you're focused increasingly on the tech side of things. I was wondering, what's your advice for tech workers specifically if they've seen something that they don't think is right and they're thinking about speaking to a journalist?
Prepare. Start to read the Tech Worker Handbook that we put together with many tech whistleblowers who went through that path before. And I'm not saying, oh, read the handbook and you will have your one recipe and it would be magic, but you need to hear what people who went through that whistleblowing path went through. You need to understand what is good for you. You need to ask you the right question from the beginning. What do you want to achieve? What level of risk are you willing to take? You need to understand how the media work. You need to find the right journalist for you. You need to know how to talk to a lawyer. You need to find organizations such as the Signals Network or Foxglove, depending on what your topic. So preparation, read the Tech Worker Handbook, and find the right lawyer, maybe the best advice. And then there's no one way to do. So what we can do is give you all the information of what different paths could look like. And then each tech worker will make their own decision and create their own path.
Thanks. And I'd add selfishly as a journalist that if you're a tech worker looking to speak out, you can find a way to contact me securely on Signal on my social media accounts. Moving on to Phumzile, who is a former South African MP, disinformation expert, and a member of the Real Facebook Oversight Board. Thanks for joining us, Phumzile.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Thanks, Billy. My name is Phumzile Van Dam. As Billy said, I serve on the Facebook Oversight Board, and I used to be a member of Parliament in South Africa, and I try to highlight issues relating to Facebook. I'd firstly like to say thank you very much to Daniel. Your story is utterly, utterly heartbreaking. And it is a shame that you have not received the right kind of support from South Africa, from the South African government. It's really just harrowing to hear what you've been through, and likely what you will still go through, as you are a David taking on a Goliath, and you'll likely have a lot of attacks thrown your way. So thank you very much to Signals Network for the psychosocial support you've been providing to Daniel and his colleagues. And thank you very much to Time Magazine for giving Daniel's story a voice, giving it a platform. I think this is the kind of story that would quite likely not be covered, in African media, because, it's just yet another young Black person exploited. This is something that happens all the time. Why should this be highlighted? So thank you for giving that story a voice. And I would really encourage any African journalists watching right now to really take these issues, take them as important and cover them, and make sure that we do not have big tech companies that come to Africa and exploit our people. It should not be that people like Daniel have to go through what they go through just to have a job. So I'd really encourage you to pick up those stories, write them, tell the stories of the harm that Facebook has caused in our continent. And Foxglove, thank you very much also for taking on what will be a historic court case for tech oversight in Africa. I think it is going to not only be helpful for us as Africans, but also just on a global level, as it will hopefully force Facebook to open up its content moderation policies for public scrutiny. So well done for taking that up. And yeah, it's been really challenging to get attention turned to Facebook's practices on the African content. I think a lot of the attention and kind of media coverage has been paid to the US and the EU and not enough in Africa. I think the important statistic to remember here is that 90% of Facebook's users reside on the African content. So the majority of the effects of the lack of the proper content moderation, of acting against disinformation, has its effects in Africa. So I'd really encourage that more attention is paid to what happens with Facebook in Africa, because that's where the majority of the harm happens. That's where there are millions of Davids who, even though they weren't staff, have felt the effects of the various harms that Facebook has caused. Just to look at a couple of examples of what poor content moderation has resulted in Africa. There's a civil war that rages in Ethiopia with a lot of ethnic cleansing that was spread through Facebook. Facebook knew about this. They haven't really done anything about it. In South Africa, a lot of xenophobic narrative has been spread on social media. And what that has led to is mobs roaming the streets and townships, going to homes owned by foreign nationals, demanding identification. A man a few weeks ago was accosted on the street, taken out of his home, and set alight. So these are the stories that need to be told of 90% of Facebook's audience and what is happening as a result of them not having proper content moderation policies in place. I think
I'll jump in here. Thanks for that, Mzile. I'm interested also to talk about the local Kenyan context, because we have an election coming up in August. There's been a lot of focus on mis and disinformation across the continent in Africa, but I wondered if you could talk specifically about the Kenyan context and how this news has landed there, to the extent that you're able to speak about that.
Yeah, I mean, electoral disinformation is also one of the major harms that lax content moderation policies had. I had the experience of monitoring what Facebook would do in South Africa. South Africa had its election late November last year, and we wanted to see whether the same steps that were taken in elections such as the US and Germany would be put in place for an African election. And those things were not put in place, from little things such as giving candidates Facebook Protect. And a really, really important issue for African elections is content moderation in African languages. In South Africa, there's 11 languages, and most people will not necessarily post in English. They'll post in different languages. So having that experience of what little attention Facebook gave to South Africa, I'm deeply worried about what will happen in Kenya. Just from reading media reports, the disinformation farms are already in force. They hire influencers, so people with a lot of followers on social media, to spread disinformation narratives. And I think in Kenya in particular, I think it's a great example of a country where there is now disinformation has become a cottage industry, where disinformation is spread on a regular basis. So it is an issue of serious concern. And if I could just encourage civil society and the media and any groups that are going to be involved in monitoring disinformation in Kenya to just move beyond fact-checking. Fact-checking is an important tool in the arsenal, but there are also other important ones. So it's important to work with, use social media tools that can aggregate content so you can see what is being spoken about, where is it coming from. So there needs to be an investment in forensic online investigation. There needs to be a proper public education campaign for the public to know that disinformation is a problem. I read a statistic saying that 75% of Kenyans don't know whether information is true or not online, and they just accept what they read as truth. So it's a really, really great and grave danger. So I'd like to encourage them to really adopt all different kinds of strategies, educate the public, use all types of tech tools, and also just demand better from governments. I think what happened in Kenya has also, some of the blame has to be shouldered on the government of Kenya. If there was proper monitoring of labor practices, of what is happening at this company working for Facebook, this should have not happened. I think a lot of big tech companies are coming to set up office in Africa, which is great because it's an opportunity for employment. But those opportunities of employment should not be resulting in exploitation and creating people who have to deal with, like Daniel has to deal with, deal with the mental health crisis that working for Facebook has caused. So I'd really also encourage you to speak to your government, launch campaigns, protests, do whatever you need to do for the government to start taking this issue and content moderation seriously.
Thanks, Phumzile. So we have about 15 minutes left, and I'd like to open the floor to Q&A questions. Happy to begin taking questions. I'd like to ask everyone to just be mindful, obviously, of the PTSD diagnosis that Daniel has had, and to not kind of ask anything that would, dig up unnecessary trauma. So our first question is from Chris Valance. Chris, are you able to turn on your microphone and video?
Yes. There you are. Can you see me and hear me? Good. Okay. Thank you. It's just, and again, to echo what you just said, I mean, I asked this question and invite Daniel to say it, but to go no further than he feels comfortable, which is to say, I wonder if Daniel, if you could describe what it was like on that first moderation shift as you realized the kind of content you were going to have to moderate. And then secondly, you talk about the trauma. Can you say a little bit about whether you're aware of others you worked with suffering similar trauma and similar symptoms? And lastly, do you think Facebook needs to put an end to the non-disclosure agreements that make it difficult for people to speak about what they've experienced?
Okay, I'll start with the last question. The non-disclosure agreements. I think at this point, I believe, I feel like I can come, and not that I'm saying that they were necessary in the first place, because because there is no need for Facebook to hide that people post terrible content on the platform. So because the NDAs only serve to say that Facebook, or rather on the platform, Facebook receives content that is potentially traumatic and whatever, and Facebook basically has the power to remove certain content or whatever. It's not like they're trying to hide it, whereas it's already out there in the public domain. So it's not necessary to have NDAs, because what the NDAs are doing right now, in fact, this is what the NDAs have done in my case and my colleagues. If they are still signing NDAs at SAMA, they are still doing that. The NDAs basically serve to suppress the content moderators from speaking up. There was a point in time that I felt like, okay, I can't talk about this, especially after the termination of my employment at SAMA. And that was specifically because of this NDA that I signed. And the worst part of it is that, yes, I signed an NDA, but I did not have a copy of it. So it was more like, I'm like, okay, okay, I can't speak about this because I entered into an agreement with some. And if you're someone like me who sort of like respects what the law is, you will basically sort of like respect the sanctity of that agreement that you had between yourself and a company like SAMA. So the NDAs are not really necessary. The other question was with regards to
it was, what was it like?
Okay, like I said, it's really hard for me to talk about this, but I'm sorry?
Oh, I'm sorry. I feel like there's a little bit of a lag.
Okay, okay, you were asking what was it like? Okay, so it was like, okay, there is something, I don't remember exactly what do they call it in psychology. I have difficulty explaining this, and I've said to I've once raised this issue, and I think I raised it with you, Billy, a couple of days ago. That when I get the question in relation to this, I would like, for instance, that we play a video, a sample video of a real event, not necessarily live. That that would be graphic, because I want a person, when you ask this question, sort of like get the feeling, that feeling when you are watching a horror movie. It's something like that. I think that's the best way of explaining it, because essentially what happens is that what do they call this? Is it observant conditioning or something? I think they call it that in psychology. Well, like you're watching someone, and then when this thing happens, it's sort of like you feel it happening to you, although it's not happening to you. And I think this is the reason why basically I have flashbacks where I'm the victim, and then when I'm sleeping, I'm the victim. It's essentially because of that. So my first experience was more like, I feel like this inhumane treatment which was happening to this person, which was a live beheading of a person, sort of like I was like, it was happening to me, and it was I really don't have a better way of explaining this, of which is why I needed an example. Another question, I've forgotten the third question. What was the question?
It was just that whether other people are you aware of other people who've suffered a similar kind of trauma as you have suffered, who are, you know, in the same workplace?
Well, the primary reason why we demanded that we enter into a negotiation, a conversation with someone that we try and sort out some of the problems that we were facing, was because almost all of us, we were in the same basket. We were feeling like, no, this is not on. This is not, cannot go on. People were collapsing at work. People would try to take days off because they were unwell. They were not feeling okay, and they had to stay off. I would see people walking off the production floor to cry, you know, that type of thing. So this is an experience that is shared by my colleagues, current and former, and I believe and understand that this is something that is happening across the globe. One of the main things that we wanted to address at the time was the emotional trauma that we are suffering, and then there wasn't anything being done to sort of ensure that at the very least we get the help that we need. That was one of the things that we needed from SAMA and Facebook, because we understood that elsewhere in the world, better was being done. People were receiving better. People were not playing games in these wellness sessions of theirs. We were having wellness sessions. We did not receive the necessary psychosocial support that we had. And let me tell you, the very first real psychological assistance I've received was since the beginning of this case, when I started attending real sessions. And the weird part about this is that these sessions were were done via the telephone. They were not physical sessions, but SAMA with their wellness programs, even Facebook, because this concept of wellness programs comes from Facebook. Everything that SAMA did came from Facebook. These things, these programs that they put in place are woefully shameful. They are, I don't know how best to describe them. They are terrible. They are not proper. They are not sufficient to ensure that a person, if I experience something traumatic, I get to, at the very least, I get something that will sort of like assist me in one way or the other.
Thanks, Daniel. I think we have another question from Rachel Schreier from the BBC.
Hi, thank you very much for this. I thought it was a really important point raised about how we focus a lot on the harms when it comes to Facebook of misinformation and the harms of the content, but very little has been paid to this kind of hidden harm of the people who are actually having to tackle it. I wanted to ask you, Daniel, first of all, what you felt might have helped, maybe not just in terms of psychological support, but in terms of what they could have done to moderate the amount you were seeing or prevent you from being exposed to so much harm? And then secondly, to you and maybe also to Phumzile, about a little bit about the interaction between the harm of the content, I guess, to the world and to society, and the harms that you guys were being exposed to, how that how the one feeds into the other, and did that kind of trauma prevent those harms and that misinformation from being dealt with appropriately?
Okay. I really had one question there. Okay, and I'm not even sure if the question was to me.
Yeah, for you, I was just wondering, what do you think would have helped from Sama and from Facebook to limit the amount of harm that you were exposed to? And also, did you feel that was preventing you from tackling the harmful content and the misinformation that was circulating?
Okay. The line was bad, but I'll answer as I've had. So this is my position. What Sama could have done then, because even now I think I've thought about this enough times to basically say this is a better way of doing things, but I'll say a bit about that just now. So what Facebook should have done and could have done, and my reasoning is because trauma is something that you take home with you. So I experienced trauma on the production floor, yes, and then after experiencing this, don't tell me that I am only ever able, even if it was proper psychosocial support, don't tell me that I am only ever able to access this support when I am at work and basically once or twice a month. That does not work. That is not how it's supposed to be, because this is because when it comes to mental issues, this is something that can happen at any time, at any moment. I could basically be sitting at home and then feel like, okay, I feel like I need my therapist. If I can make an example, about 2 weeks ago, I think it was around about 3 a.m. in the morning, something happened to me, and then I basically contacted I call her my brain doctor. I basically contacted her, and I was able to basically sort of like deal with that. Surely, I'm not sure enough, I'm not going to get rid of it, but at least I'm able to deal with it. So what they could have done and should do is to make sure that this support is there 24/7. It can't be something that they feel like as management that, okay, it's a privilege that we will only afford you maybe once or twice a month. It shouldn't be like that. That's something that they should have done. And coming to what I feel like should happen in terms of fixing this problem once and for all, is that I feel like and when I talk about this, I like making it parallel. So, for example, think of the medical profession, right? You have specialists within the profession. So, for instance, you can have a forensic pathologist. Naturally, the jobs come with traumatic stuff. So somebody who says, I want to be a forensic, work in the field of forensic pathology, naturally that person is prepared. They have the tools. They grew up with something. I don't know how or why, but it just happened. They are able to, their tolerance for graphic content and trauma is higher as compared to, well, an average Joe like me. You know, it's something that was very new to me and I could not tolerate. So, and then you'd also have within the very same medical profession, maybe a psychologist or even a nurse. If you compare the extent as to which the activities that are found in each specializations, they are different in terms of possible traumas that one can suffer from this specialization. So my contention is that content moderators there should be specialists within content moderation, and this can be done by way of say dividing the Facebook's policies into two, because you have policies that deal with graphic content, and then you have policies that deal with what I want to call normative content. So basically something like hate speech and whatever and all. So if you had divided that, now what you need to do as an employer, if you are some, go out there and find specialists who are going to deal with graphic content only. And you must be clear from the beginning and say, I need someone who's going to deal with such content, and the reasons why I'm asking for this type of a person.
Thanks, Daniel.
There was another question.
I think that was great. Is that right, Rachel?
Yeah, no, that was brilliant. That makes a lot of sense. Just the second half of my question maybe is more for Phumzile, which was about how the harm of the content and the harm to the people who need to watch it kind of interact, and whether you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, so there's a list of demands that Ben will publish, or will put in the chat, that we have for Facebook. And one of them is it releasing a list of all the third-party companies that it employs for content moderators. I think it's important that we have that full list so the investigations can happen in every single one of those companies to find out how the workers are being treated. So that's one of the demands, and that will hopefully, once the full rot is exposed, because Mark Zuckerberg only responds when there's bad PR. So once once what is happening in all those companies is exposed, hopefully then we'll get some action from Facebook.
Great, thanks everyone. I should note a couple of denials that Sama says that it does provide screening, and so does Meta, that it does provide screening for content moderators, although obviously the lawsuit brings that into real contention. Anyway, that's it for today. Thank you all so much. Thank you to the panelists for your time and for your fascinating, interesting perspectives and answers. Thank you to everyone who's joined us, everyone who asked questions. Thanks to the Real Facebook Oversight Board for putting this event on, and to Fox 11, the Signals Network, for co-sponsoring it. And yeah, thank you for all of the attention on this story. So yeah, let's keep in touch on Twitter and talk to you all soon.
Thank you, everyone.